トビデオ
So about 10 years ago, anime went through a massive transformation with the runaway success of the anime adaptation of the light novel series Sword Art Online. We can argue about the actual quality of the anime until the cows come home.
No, Daddy, that's annoying.
But its historical importance stems in it being the proverbial shot heard around the world that triggered the wave of isekai, or Trapped in Another World series, of the 2010s. It's going to take a little more time to properly assess the isekai era of anime, and it may be sooner than you think since the genre didn't really have a massive breakout hit this year compared to previous years. But one thing we can already say about it is that the isekai wave was one defined by gimmicks. In order to really make their story stand out from the rest of the pack, isekai anime of the 2010s needed to have itself a high concept hook. Something that can be explained within a few sentences and that be enough to grab your curiosity to load it up and watch it. This, of course, has led to a few truly out there scenarios to get people's attention. One of the more well-received isekai titles out there involves a teenage girl getting reincarnated as a dungeon spider. Say what you want, but you can't argue that the tactic doesn't get results. But I've mentioned before that isekai anime isn't as new as you think. There was a smaller wave of Trapped in Another World series in the 90s that was part of the greater boom in fantasy anime during that decade. And, like with the current wave, there was also the idea that an absurd premise could be enough to get an audience. So with today's anime, I present to you a 90s isekai comedy with a premise so completely off the walls crazy, you would have thought it came out 3 years ago alongside titles like Cautious Hero, the hero is overpowered but overly cautious. Real title by the by. But this bad boy came out in the autumn of 1996, and boy am I gonna have a lot of fun explaining this premise. A group of fishmen pirates are attacking a poor, defenseless harbor village. They're not only seeking booty, but also booty, in the form of the female elf priestess that the village is harboring. But before these brigands can turn this village into their own Arlong Park, 3 unexpected heroes step in and save the day. Junpei Ryuzoji, resident strongman and martial arts champion.
Hey, don't you look good enough to eat? Thank you, sir. But you know, the best part of conger eel is the sauce!
Airi Komiyama, talented actress and master of disguise and manipulation.
But the truth of this lovely warrior is... Airi Komiyama.
And Ritsugo Inoi, high school tech wizard and gun otaku extraordinaire.
My, such language.
With their arrival astride a holy cannon, actually a Type 74 tank, the villagers assumed that these people could actually be the prophesied 3 heroes of legends. After sending the pirates back to the deep, the villagers and their elf priestess come out to thank the heroes for coming to their rescue. To the heroes, no thanks is necessary, but they do have one singular, tiny request to make to the elf priestess.
You really mean anything?
Of course.
Just want to be clear here.
Ask me.
Take your clothes off.
What?
I said take your clothes off.
It turns out these 3 are not the prophesied 3 heroes, but are in fact Those Who Hunt Elves, a gang of troublemakers who have built up a nasty reputation for going from town to town and forcibly stripping any female elves there down to their birthday suits. We learn later that their scandalous actions aren't as perverse as one would expect. The 3 are actually people from our world who got transported to this fantasy world against their will, thanks to a spell cast by the highest elf in the land, Mistress Celsia Marie Claire, in order to defeat an evil sorceress. While the spell did end up working in its own way, things ended up hitting a snag when Celsia tried to send our nominal heroes back to their homeworld, but got distracted and caused the spell to scatter in fragments onto the skin of a select number of female elves throughout the world. Celsia, at great personal expense to her reputation, is forced to tag along with them, both to collect the spell fragments and to try and fail to prevent them from causing too much trouble. And she must do this while being trapped as the dopiest looking dog creature.
Hear, mistress, that the fragment has imprinted itself upon the skin of this form and will not allow you to change back.
No! You've got to be kidding! Does this mean that I have to stay this way for the rest of my life?
Oh, and the tank they travel around the world in, possessed by the spirit of a cat named Mike. I knew I was gonna have fun explaining this anime to y'all. Those Who Hunt Elves is an anime that really should not work. In a time period where even wacky fantasy anime were at least trying to adhere to the principles set forth by the likes of D&D and Dragon Warrior, here comes an anime that drops the most deliberately anachronistic devices and an absolute grab bag of colorful protagonists onto a story idea that is centered around comical assault of beautiful elf women. And yet, I do remember this being a hit. Well, enough of a hit that a mindless fantasy comedy can be. And I can see why that is. This was one of those titles that I came across early in my quest to seek out older anime that I began a decade ago. And I do remember it liking it well enough, even if some of the flaws were apparent the first time around.
What did you say, mustache girl?
I'm gonna pee on you.
Down, girl.
Plus, it's kind of nice to go back to an anime that you know mostly succeeded at being a goofy fantasy anime, where tonally similar anime like Sorcerer Hunters failed utterly.
I can go out on a date with me, please? Look, I've got all my shots and I smell good and I'm really nice.
So grab an eyeful, it's time to get the naked truth on Those Who Hunt Elves.
What the hell do you want with me?
The original creator of Those Who Hunt Elves is one Yu Yagami. A college dropout from Osaka Sangyo University, Yagami broke into the manga industry as an assistant to mangaka Yu Kinutani. Right off the bat, he knew that his genre of choice would be comedy. Funnily, the complete opposite of Kinutani's more serious work. While some sources say that he may have had a brief anthology series a few years prior, most of what I could find point to his true debut comic series being Those Who Hunt Elves, which got its start on March of 1994. Running in the shonen Dengeki Comic Gao, Those Who Hunt Elves was, and still probably is, Yagami's most well-known title to his name. With 21 volumes under its belt, it had an impressive almost 10-year run, with the series concluding in January 2003. And while Yagami has continued to do parody manga, most notably the Ultraman parody Dokoida, Those Who Hunt Elves remains his hottest commodity. So much so that he's returned to the well with a sequel series, Those Who Hunt Elves Returns, in 2007, which only lasted 1 volume, and the much more successful Those Who Hunt Elves 2 in 2013, which not only lasted 5 years and 10 volumes, but also added an additional character to the main cast with Junpei's 14-year-old sister, Mai. Hey, it was the 2010s. That was just a change the market demanded. But back to the 90s. Those Who Hunt Elves' success as a shonen manga was perfect timing on its release because, as you know, the mid-90s was an optimal period to release a fantasy anime, especially one of the novel concept of ordinary Japanese people being transported and trapped in such a fantasy world. This is where the studio Group Tak comes in. We've talked about them before on our Night on the Galactic Railroad video since they were the studio behind that anime. At this point in the 90s, Group Tak was doing pretty well for itself, considering that it had just come off of the success of the blockbuster Street Fighter II movie and the 29-episode TV anime that was produced in its wake. So when given the chance by publisher MediaWorks to adapt one of their recent hits, they jumped on it. On the technical side, Those Who Hunt Elves is your typical 90s fantasy workman's production. Animation that's not really special but gets the job done, the occasional bouts of repeating stock footage, a few weird cropping here and there, and lots of editing scars. They are practically a staple of low-budget 90s fantasy anime. It's a little weird to see a studio that animated one of the highest grossing anime films of 1994 having to do such a meat and potatoes animation for TV, but you have to remember that this was produced in the deepest and dankest pit of the recession Japan was going through at the time. Being the overseas animation studio for the Warner Brothers show Road Rovers was how Group Tak kept the lights on while making Those Who Hunt Elves. But we gotta give credit to director Kazuyoshi Katayama for making the humor of the original comic come to life on screen. And you heard that right. That's the same Kazuyoshi Katayama who provided animation direction for the Giant Robo series and co-created Big O 3 years later. You would think that a creator of such pedigree would be slumming it in such a lowbrow anime, but he understands how to hold the audience's interest in lieu of any big Sakuga moments. Namely, his storyboarding follows a lot of the Chuck Jones principles of just having well-timed humorous reactions. Whether it's characters' faces pressed against each other in a fit of rage, or just the traditional one sweat drop face faults, Kaneyama really just seems to know how to make these seemingly stock reactions feel fresh. Maybe it's because the lion's share of them are coming from Celsia. Spending most of the anime looking like a Bluey character just doubles the humor of what comedic expression she has slapped on her mug.
I think I'm being possessed by the spiritual embodiment of Celsia. My body is moving.
Ah, dear Mistress Celsia, there you are at last.
But when the comedy has to die down and we actually need to have some more low-key moments, Kaneyama manages to deliver on that, allowing for more quieter moments to really take in the setting and the events happening on screen, which in turn makes the build up to the punchline and the return of the comedy all the more richer. Credit also needs to be given to animation director and character designer Keiji Goto. Like how he did with his previous outing on Sorcerer Hunters, Goto was able to translate these characters to the medium of animation by giving them appealing designs and having them move in comedic ways that take full advantage of the medium. We should also thank him for not skimping on the best of 90s fantasy anime design tropes, from Irie's pointlessly large pauldrons to all the elf women having big, appealing elf ears. If she doesn't look like she gets radio signals on those things, I don't want them. Also, I really noticed the soundtrack on rewatch. It's your typical bright, synth-heavy music befitting a 90s fantasy anime title, but the melodies really got caught in my head this time, especially in the more action-y scenes where they remixed the opening theme. Music is credited to Hideki Tsutsumi, and I was a little surprised to know that this is his only soundtrack credit. Since this could have been his only shot, I guess he really wanted to make it count. Voice acting for both sub and dub are both totally serviceable. For the Japanese, you got Tomokazu Seki voicing the bullheaded Junpei, funnily enough coming off fresh from his breakthrough role as another famous lunkhead. Fellow Evangelion castmate Yuko Miyamura plays Ritsuko, playing a less fiery redhead this go-around. Sailor Mars herself, Michie Tomizawa, plays Irie, taking on the typical maternal leadership role, but still giving her a cunning manipulative streak befitting her role as an actress.
これセルシアなんですか?
癖が同じなの。視線や手の動きはそう簡単にはごまかせないわ。ま、それ以前に会話の怪しさでピンときたけど。
And we've got Kotono Mitsuishi as Celsia, yet another Evangelion alumnus. Ms. Masato does a great job in embodying this ball of frazzled rage that cannot be afforded even the slightest bit of dignity that she feels her station deserves. On the English side, you've got your slate of late 90s ADV regulars. You have Rosie Curtis as Ritsuko.
I know I'm strong enough. I can do it. Come on! Come on!
Kelly Manison as Irie, giving her a voice that's positively dripping with refined feminine energy, especially in contrast to her most well-known role.
I wish they weren't made that way, but you're absolutely right. Men need to be blindsided. So, here.
Huh?
And playing Junpei is Andrew Klimko. For a while, he did seem to be ADV's top choice for lead male roles, voicing Hyusaku in all-purpose cultural catgirl Nuku Nuku and Gato in Sorcerer Hunters. But it appears that sometime in the early aughts, he retired from voice acting, his last role appearing to be voicing Junpei in the second season of this anime. And it's a real shame because he kills it at being this total tactless jerk who absolutely hates this fantasy world and is stripping elves without so much as a howdy do because he wants to get home right now.
An elf? Ah! Time to see you in your birthday suit, pointy ears! Oh!
But the true scene stealer is Jessica Calvello as Celsia. She is going absolutely feral in this role. Just complete fury coming from this furry, and I love it.
Without me, you'd still be stripping elves at random!
Jeez, big mouth mutt.
Just who are you calling a mutt?
Come on, girl, fetch!
What I don't love, and it's partially the reason why I kind of don't recommend watching the first season dubbed, is the script. You can have the best dub actors in the world, and it means dick if the script blows. The chief localizer and voice director for the first season of Those Who Hunt Elves was Stephen Foster. You might remember him from when I talked about Sorcerer Hunters and how him taking over after episode 15 made the humor feel a lot meaner than before. But some of you might best know him as the guy behind that Ghost Stories dub everyone seems to like.
Have you accepted Jesus as your personal savior?
No, I'm Jewish.
His work on Those Who Hunt Elves is when he really starts to go into overdrive with his style of creative localization. Not actually translating the script, but practically full-on rewriting it to suit his brand of edgelord humor.
Must be some kind of weird lesbian nudist club.
So that means making all the characters louder and angrier and having them spat out unnecessary curse words to such a degree that it would make a manga stream scan later blush.
It's because of you that you're in this mess in the first place, so eat shit and die, your idiot lordship!
Oh, and let's not forget the slurs.
Thank you, God! Thank you, Jesus!
What a retard.
Foster is just enamored with his own joke writing abilities that, in his barely concealed contempt for the source material, he will either fill quiet scenes with needless chatter.
I feel like I'm trapped on location with Kubrick. And we're only on take 67.
Or just completely omit story details in favor of more jokes.
元気のいい子ですね。ほんと明るくていい子よ。去年両親を亡くしてね、一人で頑張ってるの。そうなんですか。
They're just gorgeous.
The guy who sent him isn't. I'd rather shove a rose thorn in my eye than go out with him again.
That bad, huh?
And while I will admit that he does occasionally have at least one joke hit per episode,
Okay, how about the two of us slip off together and have a romantic steak dinner?
I'm a vegetarian.
Well then, how about the two of us have a little drink somewhere?
I'm clean and sober.
How about sex?
I'm a lesbian.
it doesn't make up for the 10 dozen or so check please jokes that come before or after.
Avon calling. Avon calling.
And I guess he was so busy writing these jokes that Foster failed to notice that everyone was pronouncing Irie's name wrong for the entire run.
Airy.
Airy?
Airy.
Harry.
Airy? Airy.
Airy.
Harry.
You're a wizard, Harry.
In transforming a lighthearted comedy into a bad Comedy Central show, it makes Those Who Hunt Elves a slog to sit through at times when watching it in English, especially with it constantly reminding you that this was localized sometime around 1999.
Hey, if we're playing good cop, bad cop, can I talk to Scully, not Mulder?
Check this out, Miss Riverdance.
A potion that makes my every wish come true?
Backstreet Boys tickets. Oh!
Screw you, Judge Judy! Oh, this is Vegas, baby!
I thought you said it was Denny's.
You idiot.
But that part looks like a Starbucks.
So, in conclusion, Ghost Stories dub? Overrated. Now, the Those Who Hunt Elves as it existed in my memory before the rewatch was just a stupid comedy. Not an unfunny comedy, but just your average, slightly flawed goofball anime. But after rewatch and sleeping on it a bit, I find myself thinking the comedy of Those Who Hunt Elves is a lot smarter than it lets on. That first episode description I gave at the top is genuinely a genius move on the parts of the writers. Not only is it set up in media res so we don't have to go through the rigmarole of backstory, but they let the fantasy isekai bit play so straight for so long that even if you know about the premise beforehand, it will still take you off guard once the elf stripping begins. And while we're on that subject, centering your anime's plot around the sport of getting elf women naked by force is admittedly not the best pitch to get eyeballs. But trust me, it's not as prurient as it seems. Despite airing in the late night time slot, it's PG bordering on PG-13. The nudity you see is mostly Barbie doll nudity, and there's barely a handful of cheesecake on display. It almost makes you wonder why they didn't make it any trashier, but its restraint helps make the premise easier to swallow, especially considering the format is basically elf stripping of the week. Some of the time, the stripping is a bit of a karmic retribution for an elf that was a thorn in the hunter's side for the entire episode. Other times though, they have to get craftier, sometimes through cutting a deal via a duel, sometimes through getting their target sauced on party juice, and sometimes through tricking an arrogant policewoman elf into imbibing a magical potion that turns her into a giant without her clothes. Oh my. Moving on, but even though the hunters do make progress in getting spell fragments, you would expect that a madcap comedy like this would just snap back to the status quo every episode, right? No! There's constant change to be had as Those Who Hunt Elves goes along. Some of it is just there to make the lives of the hunters a bit easier in the fantasy world. The whole reason the tank gets possessed by Mike in the first place is just to eliminate the need for finding fuel. But of course, the real cause and effect is with the elf stripping itself. Turns out, you can't just go around towns randomly stripping elves of their clothing without developing a bit of a reputation, and it soon begins to follow the hunters. It leads up to probably the standout episode of the season where an elf actively seeks them out just so they can help her get out of a cursed armor she's stuck in.
It's okay, really.
It's not okay! Do you understand I haven't even had a bath in 3 whole years, goddammit!
This all culminates in a big Seinfeld-style finale where the hunters are brought before a court of law and having to explain their crimes to an all-elf jury against testimonies from their past victims, while also having people they helped out come to their defense. But, thanks to Celsia convincing the judge that getting these troublemaking humans home is the top priority, they are actually able to finagle a government license to strip elves so long as they can get them home faster. Also, there's a plot line about elements from their world merging with the fantasy world that helps with Celsia's case, but since it doesn't come up again after this season, we'll just choose to ignore it. I think my only quibble is that the ending is pretty predictable with them gaining all of the spell fragments, only to lose them all again thanks to Celsia screwing up the ritual again, and we end up on a, well, here we go again note. It's so telegraphed that it makes you wonder why they even bothered to do it in the first place.
You just couldn't live without me, could you?
Piss off!
On to the second season, which aired the next fall. First, there were a few changes in staff. While Group Tech was still the production studio, Katayama was out as director and replaced by Hiroshi Fukutomi of Fatal Fury and, less notably, Art of Fighting fame. On the localization side, Stephen Foster is thankfully out, and now the work can stand on its own without being weighed down by jokes that would have gotten laughed out of Jay Leno's writer's room. And lastly, Jessica Calvello was likely on sabbatical from her Excel Saga stint at this time, so to play Celsia, Shelley Kayleen Black was brought in. Even though Calvello has a certain energy that's hard to replicate, Kayleen Black does a good enough job in trying to get there. She really does impatience very well.
The penalty for catching fish while diving is 50,000 gold units.
What?
Here's your receipt.
But aside from those staff switch-ups, the second season still follows most of the principles of the first. There's a few more atmospheric shots and a slight increase in the amount of elf butts, but still no rapid shifts to be detected if you watch both seasons back to back like I did. They also haven't changed much of the story. For one thing, Celsia gets stuck in another beast transformation again, this time a cute panda.
This is not funny at all.
Richan? I'm so sorry! I promised to find a whip!
They actually have Celsia in her elf form for a few episodes before they spring it on you, so it does come as a bit of a surprise, but you have to wonder, are we really doing this again? I thought that since I felt it would be more rewarding to see Celsia lose her dignity in her prim and proper elf maiden form for 12 episodes. But then, I soon realized that the cartoony panda form gives her a lot more flexibility in the kinds of funny jokes she can be a part of. Namely, Junpei can be violent with her and it would still be funny.
Shut up, you dork panda! Why don't you prove something on this?
I'm getting sunset!
They also continue the line of thinking that the hunter serial elf stripping is still an issue. Government license or no, it's still a nuisance, and there are some chickens coming home to roost throughout this season. One episode involves the chief prosecutor from the last season setting up an elaborate entrapment scheme for the hunters, only to be outwitted by Irie and her amazing acting abilities.
I'm not really your teacher.
But still...
You all performed extremely well. I'm very sorry for tricking you.
And then there's also an episode wherein the hunters are actually trying to protect an elf from being stripped, and they find out that their actions have inspired a whole another organization of elf riskers with less than virtuous motives. Needless to say, they're not happy to hear that.
Lob a couple of rounds at them, Mike.
Meow!
But I do think there is one major change in that the elf stripping of the week format ends up taking a back seat. We do get glimpses of what could have been standalone episodes last season, like Irie starting a cult where all the elves need to worship naked, but mostly this season is just focused on the weird goings-on in this fantasy world. So we get episodes like Junpei helping an elf scientist prove the heliocentric theory, the hunters being hired to protect Little Red Riding Hood's grandma from the big bad wolf, and Ritsuko trying to meet Santa Claus while the hunters celebrate Christmas.
Oh, Santa!
Haha, secret Christmas episode, bitches. The standout episode to me in this season is the second episode, both because it revolves around Junpei having an extended wacko-style bathroom emergency, while also commenting on the need for toilet paper in a fantasy world where it's pretty much a luxury item. But their TP problems end up getting solved in the form of a Snuggle Bear clone named Peachy, who on top of being small and marketable, can also defecate toilet paper from out of its asshole.
I wipe my crap with this animal's crap. This is why I really hate damn crazy fantasy stories!
Also, aren't we up to 3 mascot characters for this gang now? But in the end, the elf stripping and spell fragment hunt ends up being rendered unimportant through this season, especially when halfway through, their assigned committee reports that the remaining spell fragments are such an obscenely high number that it's all but signaling that our heroes are not going home anytime soon and that they should just settle in for the long haul. Which I think ends up being the right call. Going back to Sorcerer Hunters yet again, the reason why that anime failed was because they tried to add an original ending that ended up being completely unsatisfying. God, I'm remembering it again and it's pissing me off. Those Who Hunt Elves, on the other hand, does the smart thing and just have the climax of the season being them trying to take down an ancient sorcerer boy king instead of being another chance to go home. They do get a chance in the middle of the fight, but it's a Deus Ex Machina that they get immediately screwed out of. It's clearly supposed to be a joke. The real emotional climax of the story is the hunters coming to grips that they are, for lack of a better term, villains who don't belong in this world. And even if they do save the day time and again, they still are Those Who Hunt Elves. Their elf stripping adventures are just going to continue until they go home or give up. But I don't think they dwell enough on that to make it really hit. The one chance they have in the penultimate episode, they just spend it on a zany dreams come to life plot.
Then what happens after this in your dream?
Oh, well, it's so really gross. I really don't want to talk about it. She gets all stretched out by the lobster.
And the ending is just your typical and the adventure continues chestnut. They save the day, but they still gotta strip elves across the land. Only this time, we're no longer party to it unless we buy the manga. We don't even see if Celsia loses her panda form. Hint for the manga, that's not going to be the last animal form she'll be trapped in. So final verdict on Those Who Hunt Elves. Overall, it's a perfectly fine comedy. I found it more clever than I did find it laugh out loud funny, but even then, some of the show's sillier moments still gave me a chuckle. That being said, you should at least know what you're getting into when you watch the series. No doubt the premise is going to turn people off, and even if you are won over, you will find that the anime is way more goofy than it is sexy. Also, the English dub for the first season, while having some killer performances, is really brought low by a localization that's trying to be its own bad abridged series. For a comedy anime, no less. But aside from all that, Those Who Hunt Elves is an anime series that's content with being just good enough. It has no larger ambitions it's aiming for. It has none of the epic fantasy feel of a Slayers, nor the manic gag-a-minute comedy stylings of a Konosuba. It's just trying to be a laid-back, knuckle-headed comedy with simple gags and punchlines and silly faces. It found its cozy little niche, and it's gonna stay there, damn it. And like the anime itself, that's perfectly fine.
Forgive me for stripping you!